The station was called the Concorde. It was the largest structure ever built by any living species in the known galaxy. It floated in the empty space between three star systems, spinning slowly like a silver wheel against the black. 42 species sent their representatives here. 42 flags hung in the Great Hall. And for 12 years now, one of those flags had belonged to Earth. Ambassador Ilara Voss stood at the observation window and looked out at the stars. She was tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix. She was tired in her bones, in her spirit. 12 years of smiling at creatures who looked at her like she was a pet. 12 years of sitting in meetings where no one listened when she spoke. 12 years of being the representative of a species that the rest of the galaxy considered a joke. Behind her, the door opened. She did not turn around. "The Vethrani counselor rejected our trade proposal again," said her aide, a young man named Deshi. His voice was flat. He was used to this. "What reason did she give this time?" Voss asked. "Same as always. Earth has not demonstrated sufficient relevance to the Concorde." Voss closed her eyes. Relevance. That word followed humanity everywhere in this station. It was a polite way of saying that no one respected them. And in the Galactic Concorde, respect was not earned through words or diplomacy or good intentions. It was earned in the arena. Every standard cycle, the Concorde held an event called the Trials of Worth. It was a combat tournament. Each species sent their strongest champion to fight in a massive arena called the Crucible. The species that performed well gained political power, better trade deals, and military alliances. The species that performed badly were pushed to the edges of galactic society. Humanity had entered the trials every cycle since joining the Concorde. And every cycle, their champion lost in the first round. The footage of human fighters being thrown around by aliens twice their size had become entertainment across the galaxy. On the alien networks, humans were called many things. The Vethrani called them the soft ones. The Draelith simply called them prey. It was not hard to understand why. Humans had no natural armor, no claws, no venom, no telepathy, no exoskeleton. Compared to nearly every other species in the Concorde, they were small, fragile, and unremarkable. Their technology was decent, but not exceptional. Their military was organized, but untested against galactic powers. On paper, humanity had nothing to offer except the minerals buried under their homeworld. And now, the next trials were only 10 days away. Voss turned from the window and walked through the human section of the station. It was small. Other species had entire wings. Humanity had a corridor. She passed the common room where a few Earth soldiers were eating quietly. She passed the communication hub where messages from home arrived with a 14-hour delay. She stopped at the door of Commander Idris Tanaka. She knocked once. The door slid open. Tanaka was sitting at his desk, reading something on a datapad. He was a man in his 50s, Japanese-American, with short gray hair and a face that revealed nothing. He had been the head of Earth's military delegation to the Concorde for 6 years. In all that time, Voss had never once seen him raise his voice or lose his calm. "We need to talk about the trials," Voss said, sitting down across from him. "I assumed we would," Tanaka replied. "The Vethrani tied our trade proposal to our performance in the arena. Again. If we lose in the first round again, we lose the proposal. And without that proposal, 3 Earth colonies lose access to medical supplies that we cannot manufacture ourselves." Tanaka set down his datapad. "I understand the stakes. Then tell me we have something different this time. Tell me we are not sending another soldier in standard armor to get thrown across the arena in 30 seconds. Tanaka was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "We are sending someone different." "Different how?" "No power armor. No genetic modification. No combat drugs, no augmentation of any kind. Voss stared at him. You are sending an unaugmented human into a tournament where the other fighters can break steel with their bare hands. Yes, Idris, that is not different. That is worse. Tanaka leaned forward. His dark eyes were steady. Ambassador, for 12 years, we have tried to fight the way the galaxy fights. We have tried to match their strength, their speed, their armor, and we have failed every single time. Because we will never be as strong as a Drelith. We will never be as fast as a Vethrani. We will never be as tough as a Gorvathi. Then what is the plan? The plan is to stop pretending to be something we are not. The plan is to send someone who fights the way humans were always meant to fight. Voss shook her head slowly. And what way is that? Tanaka did not smile, but something shifted behind his eyes. Something old and patient, and sharp. You will see, he said. 2 days later, the entry rosters for the trials were published across the Concord. Every species reviewed the competition. The Dralith champion, a massive warrior named Varkas, had listed his weapon loadout as a plasma halberd and his natural claws. The Vethrani champion listed her speed augmentation implants. The Gorvathi champion, a four-armed giant called Toruk, listed his body weight as his primary weapon. Species after species displayed their power through their rosters. The human entry was different. It listed a single combatant. No weapons, no augmentations, no special equipment. Just a name. Operative Ren Saito. In the officers' lounge of the Dralith delegation, General Krathvol read the human roster on a wall screen. He was 8 feet tall, covered in dark green scales, and had commanded the conquest of 4 worlds. He looked at the screen for a long moment. It was a deep, rumbling sound that shook the glasses on the table. One fighter, he said to the officers around him. No weapons, no armor. He shook his head. The soft ones have finally lost their minds. His officers laughed with him. In the Vethrani section, Counselor Siphis reviewed the same roster with her compound eyes. She tilted her angular head and made the clicking sound that her species used to express amusement. How kind of the humans, she said to her aide. They have saved us the trouble of taking them seriously. In the common areas, alien soldiers and diplomats shared the human roster like a joke. It spread across the station's network within hours. By the next morning, it had reached the entertainment channels. Comedians on 3 different worlds made jokes about it. The humans' chances of surviving the first round were set at 200 to 1. No one noticed that Commander Tanaka watched all of this without expression. No one noticed that Ambassador Voss, despite her doubts, had stopped arguing. And no one noticed that somewhere in the human corridor, in a small and unremarkable room, a man named Ren Saito sat in perfect silence, his eyes closed, his breathing slow, and his mind as still and deep as dark water. The trials were coming, and the galaxy had already decided that they knew how the story would end. The opening ceremony of the Trials of Worth was held in the Grand Arena, a dome so large that clouds sometimes formed near its ceiling. Every seat was filled. Over 6,000 delegates, soldiers, and spectators from 42 species sat in rising tiers that circled the central fighting floor. Billions more watched on screens across the galaxy. The air was thick with the sounds of alien languages, the smell of different atmospheres pumped into different sections, and the heavy weight of expectation. One by one, each species presented their champion. The Dralith went first, as reigning champions. Varkas walked to the center of the arena floor. He was 9 feet tall. His scales were the color of dark iron, and his eyes burned like hot coals. He carried a plasma halberd in one clawed hand as easily as a human might carry a stick. When he reached the center, he raised the weapon above his head and brought it down on the arena floor. The impact cracked the reinforced stone in a circle around him. The Dralith delegation roared their approval. The sound was like thunder. The Vethrani champion came next. She was thin, insectoid with 4 arms and compound eyes that reflected the arena lights like shattered glass. She moved so fast during her display that the cameras could barely follow her. She left afterimages in the air. The crowd clicked and hummed in admiration. The Gorvathi champion, Toruk, simply walked to the center and beat all 4 of his fists against his chest. He was built like a mountain, covered in dark fur. He grinned at the crowd with teeth the size of a human thumb. Unlike most champions, he seemed to be enjoying himself. He waved at the audience like he was greeting old friends. Species after species made their display. A Pyrelian, a being made of living flame, filled the arena center with a column of fire that reached the domed ceiling. A Kelzari vanished completely, its camouflage so perfect that even the thermal cameras lost it for a moment. A creature from a heavy-gravity world cracked 2 stone blocks together with its bare hands and turned them to dust. Then it was humanity's turn. The arena fell into a strange quiet. Not respectful silence, curious silence. The kind of silence an audience gives before a comedy act. From the human entrance, a single figure walked out. Ren Saito was not tall. He was not wide. He wore simple dark clothing that fit close to his body. He carried no visible weapons. He had no armor. His black hair was cut short, and his face was calm in a way that could easily be mistaken for emptiness. He walked to the center of the arena. He stood still. Then he bowed. A simple, deep bow from the waist. That was it. No display of power, no roar, no demonstration. For 2 full seconds, there was silence. It began in the Dralith section and spread outward like a wave. Thousands of aliens laughed. Some pointed. In the commentary booths, alien broadcasters struggled to keep professional expressions. "And there you have it," one Vethrani commentator said, his mandibles clicking with amusement. "The human champion. One must admire their courage, if not their judgment." "Is this a diplomatic protest?" his co-commentator asked. "Surely they cannot be serious." In the human section, Ambassador Voss sat with her hands gripping the armrests of her chair. Her face was pale. Commander Tanaka sat beside her, watching the arena with no expression at all. "They are laughing at us," Voss whispered. "Let them," Tanaka said. Below, Saito walked back to the human entrance without looking at the crowd. His steps were even. His breathing was steady. If the laughter affected him, he showed nothing. The first round pairings were announced that evening. Saito was matched against a Kelzari warrior named Thesik. The Kelzari were reptilian predators with skin that could shift color and texture to match any surface. They had venomous spines along their forearms and could strike from hiding with lethal speed. In the wild, Kelzari hunted by becoming invisible, waiting for hours, and killing with a single bite. The betting boards updated immediately, 200 to 1 against the human. The next morning, the Crucible was activated for the first match. The Crucible was the heart of the trials. It was a massive arena floor that could reshape itself into any environment. Forests could grow from the ground in minutes. Buildings could rise and crumble. Gravity could shift. Temperature could change. Each fight took place in a different landscape, randomly generated. For Saito's first fight, the Crucible built a ruined city. Broken walls, collapsed towers, narrow alleys, and dust. It looked like the remains of a civilization that had died 1,000 years ago. Thesik the Kelzari entered from one side, Saito entered from the other. A horn sounded, and the fight began. Thesik vanished immediately. His skin shifted to match the gray stone around him, and within seconds he was invisible to every eye in the arena. The cameras tracked him with thermal sensors, showing the audience a faint heat outline moving through the ruins. He was fast and completely silent, a perfect predator. Saito stood still. The commentators exchanged confused glances. The human appears to be frozen. Perhaps the reality of the situation has finally hit him. But Saito was not frozen. His eyes were half closed. His head was tilted slightly. He was listening, not just with his ears. He was reading the space around him, the way dust moved in the air, the faint change in wind when something large passed through a narrow gap. The tiny sound of scales brushing against stone. He began to move, slowly. He picked up a loose stone and threw it to his left. It clattered against a wall. Thesik's heat signature flinched toward the sound for just a moment. Saito noted the direction. He moved again, this time knocking a piece of rubble off a ledge to his right. Another flinch from the invisible hunter. Saito was not running. He was not hiding. He was mapping. The audience began to notice something strange. The human was not wandering randomly. He was moving through the ruins with purpose, throwing small objects, creating sounds, and each time gently pushing the Kelzari in a specific direction. He was hurting the predator without the predator knowing it. Thesik, confident in his invisibility, crept closer. He believed he was choosing his angle of attack. He believed he was the hunter. He moved through a narrow alley between two crumbling walls, positioning himself behind where he thought the human was standing. He raised his venomous spines. He prepared to strike. And then Ren Saito was behind him. No one in the audience saw how it happened. One moment Saito was 10 meters away. The next he was directly behind the Kelzari, close enough to touch. He moved like smoke, like something that had never been fully solid in the first place. His hand struck once, a single precise blow to a cluster of nerves at the base of the Kelzari's skull. Thesik's camouflage failed instantly as his body went limp. He collapsed to the ground, unconscious before he hit the dust. The arena was silent. The timer showed 90 seconds. Saito straightened up. He looked down at his fallen opponent. Then he knelt, carefully rolled the Kelzari into a safe position, and checked that he was breathing. He stood, bowed to the unconscious warrior, and walked toward the exit. For 5 full seconds, 6,000 spectators said nothing. The commentators said nothing. The cameras held steady on the small, quiet human walking across the dust. Then Toruk, the Gorvathi, stood up in the stands. All 4 of his massive arms were hanging at his sides. His mouth was open. He turned to the Draelith officer sitting next to him and said, in a voice loud enough for the nearby microphones to pick up, "What in the name of every star was that?" No one had an answer. In the Draelith section, General Krathval was no longer laughing. He watched the replay on his personal screen. He watched it again. His clawed fingers tightened around the armrest of his chair until the metal bent. In the human section, Ambassador Voss turned to Commander Tanaka. Her eyes were wide. "What did you send into that arena?" she whispered. Tanaka watched Saito disappear through the exit tunnel. For the first time in 6 years, something close to pride crossed his face. "A human," he said simply. "I sent a human." The galaxy could not stop talking about the human. Within hours of the first fight, the footage had been watched over 2 billion times across the Concorde's networks. Alien analysts slowed the video down, frame by frame, trying to understand how a creature with no camouflage had appeared behind one of the galaxy's best natural hunters. Military experts from 6 different species published theories. Some said the human had hidden cybernetic implants. Others claimed Earth had developed an invisibility field small enough to fit under clothing. A Vethrani scientist suggested that humans might have a secret psychic ability that had never been documented. None of them considered the simplest answer, that a human being, with nothing but training and discipline, had done exactly what they saw. Ren Saito did not respond to any of it. He did not give interviews. He did not appear in the common areas of the station. Between fights, he stayed in his small room in the human corridor. and the only people who saw him were Commander Tanaka and a military doctor who checked his health before each round. The second round came 2 days later. Saito was matched against Toruk, the Gorvathi champion. Toruk was possibly the most likable fighter in the tournament. He was massive, loud, and genuinely cheerful. He had won his previous fight by picking up his opponent and gently setting him outside the arena boundary, laughing the entire time. He was also the only alien in the Concord who had never mocked the human entry. When asked about Saito by a reporter, Toruk had simply shrugged all 4 of his shoulders and said, "Small does not mean harmless. I have been stung by small things before." The Crucible generated a zero-gravity chamber for their fight. The environment was a holosphere filled with floating platforms, metal beams, and drifting debris. There was no floor, no up or down. Both fighters would have to move through open space, pushing off surfaces and controlling their momentum in 3 dimensions. The horn sounded. Toruk launched himself forward immediately. In zero gravity, his 4 arms gave him a tremendous advantage. He could grab surfaces from 4 directions, change his trajectory instantly, and swing his enormous body with terrifying speed. He closed the distance to Saito in seconds and threw a punch that would have cracked a concrete wall. Saito was not there. He had pushed off a floating platform at an angle that carried him just beneath the Gorvathi's swing. As Toruk's fist passed through empty air, his momentum carried him forward. Saito placed one hand on the Gorvathi's passing arm and used it as a pivot, redirecting himself in a completely new direction, while sending Toruk spinning slightly off course. Toruk adjusted quickly. He grabbed a beam with 2 hands and swung around, launching himself at Saito again. This time he spread all 4 arms wide, trying to catch the human in a grip that nothing in the galaxy could escape. Saito did not try to escape. He moved into the attack, slipping between 2 of Toruk's arms and placing both hands on the Gorvathi's chest. He pushed. In zero gravity, that push meant everything. Toruk sailed backward, his own mass working against him. By the time he grabbed onto a platform to stop himself, Saito had vanished among the floating debris. This pattern continued for several minutes. Toruk attacked with power and speed. Saito never blocked a single strike. Instead, he redirected every attack, using the Gorvathi's own strength and the zero-gravity environment to send the larger fighter tumbling, spinning, and crashing into platforms. Toruk was fighting himself and did not fully realize it. Finally, after being sent into a metal beam for the 3rd time, Toruk stopped. He floated in the center of the chamber, breathing hard. All 4 arms hung at his sides. He looked at Saito, who floated nearby, calm and barely winded. Toruk started laughing. It was a deep, genuine laugh that echoed through the hollow sphere. "I yield," he said, still laughing. "I yield to the small one who makes me punch myself." The audience did not laugh this time. They watched in thoughtful silence as Saito bowed to Toruk, and Toruk bowed back with the clumsy enthusiasm of someone who had never bowed before in his life. The 3rd round was against a Vethrani swift killer named Syrinx. The Vethrani were the fastest species in the Concord. Syrinx could cross a room in the time it took most species to blink. Her compound eyes could track movement at speeds that would be a blur to any mammalian eye. The Crucible generated a darkness sector. Complete, absolute blackness. No light of any kind. The audience watched through infrared cameras. Syrinx was confident. Her compound eyes could detect even the faintest traces of movement in darkness. She began scanning the space immediately, looking for the heat signature of the human, the slight shift of air that would reveal his location. She found nothing. Saito was moving, but he was moving so slowly, so deliberately, that his body did not register as movement to the Vethrani's vision. Her compound eyes were built to track fast motion. They were almost blind to things that moved at the speed of growing grass. Saito crossed the dark arena one careful step at a time, his body temperature controlled through breathing techniques, his movements so fluid that the air barely stirred around him. She began moving faster, circling the darkness, searching. She knew the human was in here. She could smell him faintly, but she could not find him. She never saw him coming. One moment she was turning to scan a new section of the arena. The next, a hand closed around her primary weapon arm and twisted it, gently but firmly, into a lock. Her secondary arms reached for the attacker, but he was already behind her, and a soft pressure on a nerve cluster in her thorax made all four arms go weak. "I am here," Saito said quietly. His voice was the first sound in the darkness. Syrinx yielded. The fourth round was the one that most analysts considered impossible. Saito was matched against a Pyrelian, a being made of living plasma and fire. Its body temperature was over 2,000 degrees. It could not be touched. It could not be grabbed or struck. Physical combat was meaningless against it. Every previous opponent who had faced a Pyrelian had either used energy weapons or lost. Saito had no energy weapons. The crucible generated a mixed environment, with stone corridors, open chambers, and narrow ventilation shafts. Saito entered and immediately began studying the space. He did not approach the Pyrelian. Instead, he moved through the environment like he was reading a book, touching walls, feeling airflow, noting the placement of every corridor and every opening. Then he began to close doors. He blocked ventilation shafts with rubble. He collapsed narrow passages. He was reshaping the arena itself, controlling the flow of oxygen through the space. Fire needs air. This was not alien science. This was something human children learned. The Pyrelian, confused by an opponent who would not engage, moved to find the human. But as it moved through the corridors, it began to feel itself weakening. The flames that made up its body flickered. Its heat dropped. The passages it traveled through had been starved of fresh oxygen. Every path it chose led to another section where the air was thin and stale. By the time it reached Saito, its flames had shrunk from a roaring inferno to a small, struggling glow. It was not injured. It was not in danger. But it was too weak to fight. "I controlled the air," Saito explained to the judges when they asked how he had won. "Fire is not my enemy. Oxygen is my ally." The galaxy watched all of this, and the galaxy began to change its mind. In the political halls of the Concord, Ambassador Voss found doors opening that had been shut for a decade. Diplomats who had ignored her messages now requested meetings. Trade partners who had dismissed Earth now sent proposals. The word relevance stopped appearing in rejections. But not everyone was pleased. In the Drelith delegation, General Krathval watched every fight with growing anger. He called Saito's methods dishonorable. He called the victories tricks, not combat. He told his officers that the human had not won a single fair fight. "He hides. He runs. He plays with the environment like a rat in a maze," Krathval said, his voice heavy with contempt. "In the next round, my champion will show the galaxy what a real warrior looks like." The semi-final bracket was announced. Ren Saito versus Varkas, the Drelith champion, the most dangerous fighter in the tournament, the undefeated destroyer who had killed opponents in the arena and called it sport. Commander Tanaka visited Saito's room that evening. He found the operative sitting on the floor in meditation. Tanaka stood in the doorway for a long moment. "You do not have to do this," he said. "We have already proven more than anyone expected." Saito opened his eyes. They were dark, calm, and completely clear. "The galaxy is not watching to see if we can win 4 fights," he said. "They are watching to see if we can face the thing that terrifies us and still stand." Tanaka nodded slowly. He understood. "Then stand," he said. Saito closed his eyes again and returned to the silence inside himself. Every seat in the grand arena was filled. Every standing section was packed. Every screen on the Concorde station was tuned to the same feed. Across the galaxy, on worlds that had never cared about human affairs, billions of beings stopped what they were doing to watch. The semi-final of the Trials of Worth. Ren Saito of Earth versus Varkas of Dralith. The crucible took longer to generate than usual. When it finished, the arena floor had become something no one had ever seen before. It was a layered landscape of ancient stone architecture, rising columns, crumbling bridges, and deep pools of dark water. Thick fog rolled through the lower levels. High above, the gravity generators shifted at random intervals, changing the pull and direction of weight without warning. It was beautiful and dangerous, like a temple designed by someone who wanted to trap gods. Varkas entered from the east gate. He was enormous, 9 feet of muscle and dark iron scales. His claws were long enough to tear through hull plating. His tail was as thick as a human torso, and ended in a bony ridge that could shatter stone. His eyes glowed faintly red in the fog. He carried no weapon. He did not need one. His body was the weapon. 11 cycles of victories, dozens of opponents defeated, 3 killed, legally, within the rules. He was the most feared fighter in the history of the trials. He looked across the fog and waited. Saito entered from the west gate. He looked the same as always. Dark clothing, no armor, no weapon visible. His hands were empty. His expression was quiet. Compared to the mountain of scales and muscle across from him, he looked like something that could be broken with a careless gesture. The horn sounded. Varkas did not waste time. He exploded forward with a speed that should have been impossible for something his size. The distance between them vanished in a heartbeat. His right claw swept through the air in a horizontal arc that could have cut a vehicle in half. Saito dropped. He went flat, and the claws passed over him, close enough to disturb his hair. He rolled sideways, and was on his feet again in one motion. But Varkas was already turning. His tail swung in a low arc like a battering ram. It caught Saito across the ribs. The impact threw him sideways. He hit a stone column with his back and dropped to the ground. Pain exploded through his chest. He tasted copper in his mouth. The arena roared. The Dralith delegation surged to their feet. General Krathvol leaned forward in his seat, his eyes bright with satisfaction. The commentators spoke over each other. A devastating hit. The human is down. I believe this is where the story of Earth's surprising run comes to its natural. Saito stood up. He pressed one hand against his ribs. Something was cracked in there. His breath came shorter than before. Blood from a cut on his scalp ran down the side of his face. He wiped it away with the back of his hand. And then something changed in his eyes. The calm was still there, but beneath it, something surfaced. Not anger, not fear, something deeper than both. The kind of focus that does not just look at the world, but reaches into it and takes hold. He moved into the fog. Varkas followed. His heavy footsteps echoed off the stone as he searched for the human. The fog was thick enough to reduce visibility to a few meters. For a creature used to open combat, used to seeing his opponent and crushing them with overwhelming force, the fog was an irritation. For Saito, it was home. Varkas felt the first strike before he saw it. A sharp pain in the back of his left knee, right in the gap between 2 armor scales. He spun, claws slashing, but hit nothing. The fog swirled where something had been a moment ago. He growled and moved forward. A second strike hit the joint of his right elbow. Then a third, to the soft tissue behind his shoulder plate. Each blow was small. Each blow was precise. None of them were powerful enough to bring down a Dralith. But each one targeted a nerve, a joint, a gap in the natural armor. "Come out and fight me," Varkas roared. His voice echoed through the stone architecture. Face me, coward. Stop hiding in the fog like a worm. There was no answer. The gravity shifted. Varkas stumbled as his weight suddenly pulled him to the left instead of down. He caught himself on a column, his claws digging into stone. In that moment of imbalance, Saito appeared from behind a pillar and struck the exposed nerve cluster under Varkas's right arm. The Drelith's arm went numb for 3 seconds. His claws released the column. He stumbled again. By the time his arm recovered, Saito was gone. It was the longest single fight in the history of the trials. The audience watched it in something that went beyond excitement. It was closer to disbelief. Varkas was the stronger fighter. That was never in question. Every time his attacks connected, Saito suffered. A tail sweep to his leg left him limping. A backhand caught his shoulder and spun him into a wall. He was hurt. He was bleeding from a dozen cuts and impacts. His left arm hung at his side for several minutes before he managed to shake feeling back into it. But he never stopped moving. He used the water to mask his scent. He used the fog to break line of sight. He used the gravity shifts, riding them while Varkas fought against them. He struck and vanished, struck and vanished. Every blow was small. Every blow was surgical. And slowly, gradually, the damage accumulated. Varkas began to slow. The nerve strikes had built up. His right arm was sluggish. His left knee was not bending properly. His tail swings were a fraction slower than they had been. For a creature that relied on speed and power, even a small reduction was significant. And he was angry. The kind of deep, burning anger that clouds judgment and turns strategy into blind force. He roared constantly now. He smashed pillars and shattered bridges, trying to find and crush the shadow that kept hurting him. He was destroying the arena itself, and each act of destruction made the environment more chaotic, more broken, more suited to a fighter who thrived in chaos. "You are nothing," Varkas bellowed, his voice raw. "You are prey, soft, weak, worthless prey." The arena microphones picked up a quiet voice from somewhere in the fog. It was steady, controlled, and showed no sign of the pain that must have been screaming through Saito's battered body. "A shadow does not need to be stronger than the dragon. It just needs to be patient." Varkas lost the last of his control. He lowered his head and charged toward the voice with everything he had. 9 feet and 800 pounds of Drelith fury, moving like a freight train, claws extended, jaws open. Saito stepped out of the fog directly in his path. For one terrible moment, it looked like suicide. The commentator shouted. Ambassador Voss gripped Tanaka's arm. The audience held its breath. Saito did not dodge. He waited until the last possible second, then moved to the side by the width of a hand. He placed both palms against Varkas's charging body and redirected, not with strength, with angle, with timing, and with the gravity shift that hit at that exact moment, pulling hard to the right. Varkas, all of his momentum suddenly twisted sideways and downward, crashed through a stone pillar. The impact was enormous. Dust and rubble exploded outward. The ground shook. Before the dust had settled, Saito was on the Drelith's back. His hand held something that had been hidden in his sleeve the entire tournament. A short blade, no longer than a finger. He pressed its edge against the one spot on a Drelith body that had no scales, no armor, no protection. The soft tissue beneath the jaw, where the great blood vessels ran close to the surface. Varkas froze. He could feel the blade. He could feel the human's weight on his back, light as a bird, but positioned with absolute precision. The arena was completely silent. Varkas lay still for a long moment. His red eyes stared at the crumbled stone in front of him. His claws dug into the ground. Every instinct in his warrior body told him to fight, to throw off this tiny creature, and crush him. But he was a warrior, and a true warrior knows when the fight is over. "I yield," Varkas said. His voice was rough and quiet. The arena erupted, not just in cheers, in something beyond cheers. Aliens stood on every level. Some were silent with shock. Some wept, though they would never admit it. In the Draelith section, the officers were motionless. General Krathval sat perfectly still, his expression carved from stone. Saito removed the blade. He climbed off the Draelith's back and stepped away. Then he offered his hand. Varkas stared at the small hand in front of him, a hand with no claws, no scales, no natural weapon of any kind, a hand that had just defeated him. Slowly, the Draelith took it. Saito helped him to his feet. They stood face to face, 9 feet of armored predator and a bleeding, battered human, barely reaching his chest. Varkas raised his clawed fist and pressed it against his own chest, the Draelith salute, the sign of respect given only to a worthy enemy. In 11 cycles, he had never given it to anyone. Until now. The galaxy watched a dragon bow to a shadow, and nothing was ever quite the same again. The final match of the Trials of Worth was almost an afterthought. Saito's opponent was a Thesserai, a tall, crystalline being from a low-gravity world. The Thesserai were formidable fighters under normal circumstances, fast and precise with their razor-edged limbs. But this particular Thesserai had watched the semi-final. It had watched a human being dismantle the most feared warrior in the galaxy, using nothing but patience, precision, and an understanding of combat that went deeper than muscle and bone. The Thesserai fought carefully. It kept its distance. It probed with cautious strikes and retreated whenever Saito shifted his weight. It was fighting not to lose, rather than fighting to win. And against Saito, that was the same as surrender. The fight lasted 6 minutes. Saito controlled the space from the first second, moving the Thesserai where he wanted it, closing off escape routes with positioning alone, until the crystalline fighter found itself in a corner with no room to maneuver. When Saito closed the distance, the Thesserai raised both limbs in the universal gesture of yielding. Saito bowed. The Thesserai bowed back. And it was over. Humanity had won the Trials of Worth. The grand arena shook with sound. 6,000 spectators reacted in 42 different ways. The Gorvathi stomped their feet until the stands vibrated. The Vethrani made a rapid clicking that meant something between surprise and admiration. The smaller delegations cheered and whistled and made sounds that had no human translation. Even some of the Draelith officers, not all, but some, struck their fists against their chests in reluctant acknowledgement. In the human section, the small Earth delegation stood in stunned silence. Some of them had tears on their faces. These were people who had spent years being ignored, dismissed, and laughed at. People who had eaten their meals in a small corridor, while other species feasted in grand halls. People who had represented a world of 8 billion souls, and been told, again and again, that those 8 billion souls did not matter. They mattered now. Ambassador Voss did not cry. She was beyond tears. She stood with her back straight and her chin raised, and watched the scoreboard display a result that no one in the galaxy had predicted. Earth, first place. Commander Tanaka stood beside her. His face was as still as ever, but his hands were shaking, and he did not try to hide it. The political consequences were immediate and enormous. Within 24 hours of the final match, the Vethrani Trade Council approved the proposal they had rejected for 12 straight years. Medical supplies, technology exchanges, and shipping routes that Earth's colonies desperately needed were suddenly available. The document was signed without a single objection. The Concord's governing body voted to upgrade Earth's status from observer to full council member. For the first time, humanity would have a vote on galactic policy. Their flag in the Great Hall was moved from the back wall to the main circle, hung alongside the flags of the oldest and most powerful species. Military alliances were offered. 7 species sent formal requests to establish joint defense agreements with Earth. Some of these species had refused to even acknowledge human communications the month before. But the changes that mattered most were not political. They were cultural. Across the galaxy, alien scholars and military historians began studying something they had never bothered to examine before. Not human technology, which was unremarkable by galactic standards. Not human science, which was competent but not groundbreaking. They studied human philosophy, human warfare, human survival. And what they found surprised them. They found a species that had never been the strongest creature on its own world. Humans had shared their planet with predators that were faster, stronger, and more heavily armed than they were. Bears, tigers, wolves, crocodiles, sharks. For most of human history, people were not at the top of the food chain. They were somewhere in the middle. And yet they had survived. They had not just survived. They had come to dominate every environment on their world. They had done it not through strength or speed or natural weapons, but through something that no other species in the galaxy had developed to the same degree. Adaptability, creativity, the ability to watch a stronger enemy and find its weakness, the ability to turn the environment itself into a weapon, the ability to endure pain, learn from failure, and come back with a new strategy. Every human martial art, every combat tradition, every military doctrine in human history was built on the same basic truth. We are not the strongest, so we must be the smartest. We are not the fastest, so we must be the most creative. We cannot win by force, so we must win by understanding. Judo, the gentle way, using the enemy's strength against them. Aikido, the way of harmony, redirecting force rather than meeting it. Ninjutsu, the art of stealth, patience, and invisible warfare. Guerrilla tactics, asymmetric strategy. Thousands of years of learning how to fight enemies that should have destroyed them. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. Every other species had evolved as the dominant predator on their world and built their combat traditions around their natural advantages. The Draelith fought with overwhelming power because they had always been the most powerful. The Vethrani fought with speed because they had always been the fastest. They had never needed to be creative about combat because they had never needed to fight from weakness. Humans had always fought from weakness, and that had made them something the galaxy did not have a word for. General Krathval requested a private meeting with Commander Tanaka 3 days after the trials ended. They met in a neutral conference room, just the two of them. The old Draelith general, who had commanded armies and conquered worlds, sat across from the quiet human officer. For a long time, Krathval said nothing. He stared at the table with his red eyes, and something worked behind his expression that might have been thought or might have been pain. Finally he spoke. "We always assumed your weakness was your failing. We believed you were lesser because you were soft. Because you had no claws, no armor, no venom." He paused. "We never considered that your weakness was your teacher." Tanaka met his gaze steadily. "Every human who has ever lived learned the same first lesson, General. The world is bigger and stronger than you are. The question is what you do with that knowledge." Krathval nodded slowly. It was a small motion, but from a Draelith general, it carried the weight of worlds. In the weeks that followed, small changes rippled across the Concord. Toruk the Gorvathi visited the human section of the station and asked if someone could teach him what he called the grabbing art. A young Earth Marine spent 3 afternoons teaching him the basics of jujitsu. Toruk kept forgetting which of his 4 arms to use, and his laughter echoed through the corridor every time he accidentally put himself in his own hold. Counselor Siphis of the Vethrani quietly sent a memo to her diplomatic corps. The phrase, "the soft ones," was to be removed from all official and unofficial communications. No explanation was given. None was needed. On the last day of the cycle, before the delegations departed, Ambassador Voss stood at the podium in the Great Hall and delivered a short address to the Concord. 42 species watched. Billions listened. "You looked at us," she said, her voice clear and calm, "and saw no claws, no armor, no venom. You were right. We have none of those things. What we have is 10,000 years of learning how to fight without them. We are not the strongest species in this galaxy. We may never be. But we are the species that learned to survive without strength. And that, counselors, is why we are still here." She stepped down from the podium into silence. Then, one by one, delegations began to stand. The Gorvathi first, then the smaller species, then, slowly, reluctantly, but unmistakably, the Vethrani. Even a handful of Draelith officers rose from their seats. Not all of them, not yet, but it was a beginning. 3 weeks later, on a quiet street in a small city in Japan, Ren Saito walked through a wooden gate and into a dojo. He removed his shoes at the entrance. He folded them neatly beside the door. He stepped onto the mat in bare feet, and the wood was cool and smooth beneath him. A dozen children were already warming up inside. They ranged from 6 to 12 years old. When they saw him, they stopped and bowed. He bowed back. "Saito-sensei," one of the younger ones said, "is it true you fought an alien made of fire?" Saito knelt on the mat and considered the question with the same seriousness he gave everything. "I did not fight the fire," he said. "I understood the fire. There is a difference." The child looked confused but nodded, as children do when they sense that understanding will come later. "Line up. We begin with breathing." The children formed a line. The dojo was quiet except for the sound of breathing and the faint creak of old wood. No one outside would have looked twice at the building. No one walking past would have guessed that the man kneeling on the mat had changed the course of galactic history. And that was exactly the point. Outside, the sun moved slowly across a blue sky. Birds called from the trees along the street. The world was ordinary and peaceful, and full of small, unremarkable things. Somewhere far above, past the clouds and the atmosphere, and the black distance between stars, 42 species were learning a lesson that humanity had known since the very beginning. The most dangerous creature in the universe is not the one with the sharpest claws. It is the one that learned to survive without them.